Hello and welcome to this episode of Beat Teacher Burnout. I'm your host, Rowena Hicks, and I'm so glad you're here today because we're going to be talking about visible leadership. We're going to be talking about well-being as a label on its own. It doesn't fit the bigger school community and what does make a difference. So we're going to be looking at research. We're going to look at practical on-the-ground examples. So today I have a guest, Sahreen, and she's going to be talking from her experience as a head teacher, CEO. She has an MBA, lots of experience. So welcome, Sahreen. It's great to have you here today.
Thank you, Rowena.
Would you like to tell people a little bit about yourself before we get going?
Yeah, so I've been kind of in the school leadership space, I would say, for about 15 years. Not been a CEO yet, though, Rowena. So thank you.
Okay.
I'm currently director of North West London Teaching School Hubs, which spans across Brent, Barnet, and Enfield. So we've got a DFE commission of delivering the golden thread, and actually we're in the business of recruiting trainee teachers as well, so we're really trying our best to get teachers into the profession and train them. And then the other aspect of my role is an executive headship, so I'm also executive head in the multi-academy trust. We've got 2 secondaries, 1 primary, and I have responsibility to oversee the primary. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Okay, wonderful. I'm sorry about that.
No problem.
I just sort of assumed because of your experience, I guess I'd read all these amazing sort of labels that you have attached in your LinkedIn profile. So, Sahreen, obviously this is about burnout. This is about schools with their staff teams, and we know that staff are leaving in droves. We know that staff burnout and stress statistics are very, very high. What, in your experience and from your research, makes the biggest difference in your teams?
I think the research in this area, and I've spent a lot of time sort of studying people and leading people. And I think that for me, it's about making sure that we're really clear on what the research actually says, because focusing on one of the pillars, so there are 4 pillars from what the research says. One of them is around well-being. But in my view, if you only focus on that one, you can actually make things worse, because what you're not doing is putting in the correct infrastructure. So like all good leaders, you've got to have a strategy for people. You've got to have a strategy for organizational culture. You've got to have a strategy for making sure that we are retaining staff and creating cultures in schools that are positive, that are evidence informed, that are child centered. And I think that all of those things have to be very clearly planned in for and spoken about from a holistic angle, rather than just looking at it from a well-being lens.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you want to talk us through those 4? Because I know you've researched into them, and I think they balance out the whole issue of burnout really well for schools.
Yeah, so I think the first one is around leadership and management. So how visible are the leaders? What kind of culture have they created in the school? Have they been bold and courageous enough to really make it a child-centered philosophy? So actually, it is very clear that the decisions they make are always in the best interest of the children. And actually, that takes a very clear articulation of the vision, reminding the people that you lead of that vision all of the time, and reminding people why what they do matters so much. It's not about a good Ofsted report. It's not about winning in the league tables. This is about preventing unemployment. This is about making sure that the children become adults that are successful, that thrive, and actually have really good literacy rates. Because if you don't have very good literacy rates, what can happen is if you look at sort of people in prison, a lot of them, I think it's 60 or 70%, either have a specific language communication need or are not very literate, have high literacy. So it's about making sure that culture of why we do what we do, we're not shy about. We're really, really clear about, actually, we have to get this right, because this is about this child's whole life, and the power of, if we get it right, we can turn around generations. We can change generational unemployment. We can turn around generational aspirational cultures. We can really, really make a difference on a big scale, not just our little school where we come every day and leave every day. It's about making sure that the staff you lead, that happens. I think also it's about making sure that leaders understand that end of term busyness. Now, I don't have any research in this area, But one of the things I've noticed, being in schools, is about 6 times a year, the couple of weeks before every end of half term and every end of term, staff need leaders even more than they do at other points of the year to be the best versions of themselves. So not highly strung, not looking like they're on their hands and knees, not going around creating these kinds of, this energy of so much to do, but really taking the time to put their best versions of themselves. So having that personal responsibility of showing up for the staff when they need you most, because that's when staff around you need you to be your best version, because they have just 5 or 6 weeks or 7 weeks, depending on the length of the term, of very, very, very frontline, difficult stuff of doing what it is they need to do to turn up for those children every day. And I think that leaders at that point have a real duty to be even more visible and even more positive and even more aware of their own stress and their own in the grip, if you like, so that, that all that hard work that's happened in that term of building people and investing in people isn't then ruined or wasted.
Yeah, I love that. And actually, there's a piece of research, a small piece of research out that shows that if you take a moment before you walk in the door of a school or in the classroom, just take a moment to breathe, even for 10, 20, 30 seconds, and think, how do I want to turn up today? And that's for teachers and leaders alike. But it just reminds you, I want to bring energy. I want to bring enthusiasm, because, we all went into the profession because we're passionate about changing lives, aren't we? But I guess the question I would have, Sahreen, is who's looking after the leaders then? If the leaders are being that self-aware and that strategic and culturally changing the way that they are leading the school, who's then looking after them?
Well, I think we have to, I think we shouldn't be shy about saying there's an aspect of personal responsibility that all adults have to turn up, to remind themselves that the scope of the work that they're doing. So I think that's something we have to develop ourselves. So no one's ever really shown me how to do that. I've just figured out over the years what I have to do to myself, or make time for myself to be even, to be the best version of myself. So I think we have to spend some time looking after one another. I think leadership teams have to do that. I think the head teacher has to carve in time in leadership meetings to develop that, and the CPD to be centered around that. And some powerful practical ways of doing that is to script conversations, is to be mindful of, things like how you dress. And I think, about having a culture of making sure that you can call it out with one another. So we do a lot of sort of psychometric testing in the schools that I've led in. So either this one before, where I invest a lot of time making the leadership group be very comfortable in calling out each other's blind spots. So I don't know if you've heard of MBTI, but this idea of making sure that we can safely call out when another leader is in the grip. So I think in those particularly pinch points where leaders can very easily get into the grip, if you've invested in that culture and that culture is working, then technically one leader should be able to cover another leader if they notice and spot that they're in the grip. So it's not just being self-aware, it's being aware of one another as a group quite well. And I think that's about the safe space that a head teacher creates for leaders to support one another at those times and at other times, and being able to say, listen, I don't think I'm the best person at this moment to be able to deal with that. Can someone do that on my behalf? And I think that, when you get culture right is when you've got those conversations in leadership meetings weekly that are right, and where that's a genuinely safe space to be authentic, because leaders can't always be fully authentic with the people that they lead. There's a limit to that, but with one another they should be able to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's basically about having a leadership team where there is trust, safety, authenticity, to be yourself and to be real with each other, because then you can be the best. Yes. Yeah.
And I think that if you see that someone's in the grip, that you might be able to sit down with them and say, I've noticed that, you're behaving in a way that might be adding a bit of pressure in the well-oiled machine. So do you want to sit down? Let's script your day. Let me give you 5 minutes. Let's talk it through. What can I do to help you? Because you're acting a bit crazy. And I think there's no harm in having language like that between people that you trust. And I think it's that developing a very established shared lexicon, which means that you're giving each other permission to always help you to be your best version, especially when staff need it the most.
Yeah. No, I love that. Do you want to go on to the next, the second of the 4?
Yeah, so the second one I would say is the behaviour and management. So again, really being clear about culture. Are our leaders visible? Are they making sure that they know the children that are dysregulated or presenting with, behavioural difficulties with teachers? Do they know the impact that's happening for that teacher? Are they giving them enough supervision and respite? Are they walking around and acknowledging that? Are they valuing it? Are they then trying their best to think innovatively about what more they can do? And I think that those aspects of consistent behaviour routines, making sure that the behaviour policy isn't just a lovely, neat policy that's formatted, but it's actually in action. So you're going around and checking that, is it working? Are you holding the narrative? When I was in a school in special measures, one of the things that I learned from a behaviour consultant that I worked with was holding that narrative. So when you do have a school where behaviour systems and routines are not well established or well embedded, sometimes you can develop a culture of staff making sweeping statements. Everyone's fighting, everyone's doing this and everyone's doing that. And what you do very slowly is build a picture around what is actually happening and what are you doing in response to that, and what is the impact of that. And I think if you're always holding that narrative and making sure that you're evaluating the impact that you're having on improving behaviour over time, that's all staff want from you. I don't think staff expect leaders to have all the answers on everything all of the time, but it's about that complete transparency of that transaction. I, as a teacher, am responsible for 30 children and 5 of them are, do drain me. And ultimately, it's what are you doing for me that matters. So yes, it's important what you're doing for the school, but as a teacher in the big system, I want to know, what is that leader doing for me? And how is it making a difference for me? Because this is my everyday life. And I think we mustn't ever take that human element out of which teachers have got the trickiest children in the school, and without adultifying them. I feel really passionately about this. And I have no time for people that adultify children. I'm really, really passionate about this. And actually, it's really important that we are seeing behaviour through the lens of disaffected children and getting it right for them, because that's where our duty is. And I think creating that culture, but not taking away from the effort that it takes an adult to support that child, that can be quite tricky.
Yeah, I love that. I was a Senko for many years, and I had teachers who would come and say, oh, this one of your children is doing this, Rowena, and you've got to sort this out. But actually, we'd always go back to the fact that the child's behavior is a message. They're telling you something. And actually, also a lot of the staff don't have the training that they need, and it's about asking them, what support do you need to enable this child to succeed, because that's the end goal, and
Absolutely.
To be included. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that it's not losing the human element of, it's just really difficult sometimes, and actually special needs is an area, because I was a Senko for about 5 or 6 years, and I would say that I'm not sure Senkos are bold enough to say sometimes you just need a break from the child, and it's that the importance of respite. I mean, the most highly paid therapists get supervision, but why is it that we're not even trained psychotherapists, but we don't qualify for a little bit of respite? And I think that we need to be better at just accepting and giving ourselves permission to know that we just need a break. We just need half an hour, 1 lesson a day away from this child, and that's all we need. That's all we're asking for here. And I think that language of respite and that language of what do you need from me that will help you today, and I think that human touch is crucial. And actually, if your leaders are busy drowning in paperwork, stuck in their offices, not getting out and seeing the children, connecting with them and connecting with their staff, that's never going to happen. So without the leadership and management culture, the behaviour management thing, I think, will be limited as well. And that's why these pillars depend on each other. You've got to get them, the infrastructure and the strategy right for each of them, because the next one is only built upon the one before it.
Okay. So assuming we've got our language, culture in place of trust, safety, and actually for staff at some of the schools I've been in, they don't dare say I need help. So if we've got that culture of safety to say that, what would be the third pillar?
So marking and feedback. Now, if you ask most teachers what's the thing that they do at the weekend, it's either planning or it's marking like 60 books that they've got to get through. And now we almost have no excuse as a sector, because there is so much research done in this area by so many fantastic people that have spent lots of time looking at marking and feedback. And I think like we almost need to have a rule of three here, that if you can't justify it in three different ways, the importance and the rationale behind why you're insisting on a set marking policy, then I don't think teachers should be asked to do it. And then there have been some schools and institutions that have had a really kind of radical approach to marking and feedback, and it makes a difference. I know some schools, and we're one of them, that we're piloting the use of AI with marking and feedback. And I think as a trust, we've got an AI strategy meeting that we're starting after the Easter break, which is going to meet weekly to sort of think about how else we can use AI to reduce workload and sort of those demands. But the biggest thing in workload, I think, is the marking. And so I think we need to be very clear about what our systems are. Are they evidence informed? And again, are leaders being held to account with them? Are trustees and governors speaking to leaders about that? Do they even know that this is a big issue in the sector? Are they sitting down and paying due diligence to what the research says, or are they just accepting what a leader tells them? And it's that culture of accountability has to be right, and it has to be a leadership consideration. I don't think that one leader in silo can say, this is what I'm going to do because this is what I think should happen. I think we've got a duty, just like we do with curriculum planning, to go back and look at what the research says and what the evidence says, because we cannot stay fixed in this mindset of every book needs to be marked every day. There's lots of really good research about self-assessment, peer assessment, the use of AI now, and actually verbal feedback being quite powerful as a method of genuinely improving the child. And I read a really amazing article, Harvard Business Review, about fundamentally the research points to feedback doesn't even work. Adults don't like receiving feedback. Like, feedback doesn't improve things. So, why as a sector are we obsessed with feedback? We're just obsessed with giving feedback to teachers and children. And maybe we need to look at this lens from an evidence and research point of view, as opposed to how we would like our books to look. And don't get me wrong, I love a neat book that has high standards in it and, looks like the curriculum is being implemented. But be really clear about where that is coming from. Is it you or is it the research?
Yeah. I think one of the things that's always been a bit of a bugbear for me is, years ago, the Sutton Trust came back with immediate positive feedback being the way that children move on the best with their learning. And so I used to go to head teachers and say, staff are sort of dying under the reams of marking, rather than being creative and planning and, doing what they came in to do. But the leaders were saying to me, but we're worried that Ofsted will think that we're not doing our job well if we don't have these beautiful books with orange and pink and green or whatever colors the school is choosing. And it was that fear of the judgment that stopped them from doing what they sort of knew was right.
I've been an inspector now for about 11 years, I would say, and in the current framework there is no expectation for books to look at for the marking. That we do not have a preferred style of that, and Ofsted would not go around and say you've got to be marking in a certain way. It is sometimes you have to just sort of, I think when you lead schools, there is this, and I get it as a school leader, you can sometimes forget that there's a world outside of your school, and it's like seeing a good painting. That detail is important. But actually, to really enjoy that beauty of that painting, you've got to step back and get the perspective on it. So stand back and have a look at that painting and compare it to the other art and wonderful stuff that exists. And I think that sometimes as school leaders, we can forget that to even listen to the news, because it's all about the school. It's all about the school, and we can become so, rightly so, obsessed with our schools and really passionate and committed to our schools and dedicated to the communities that we serve. We stop and remind ourselves that there's many schools out there that we could learn from and share practice and have really, really fruitful and collaborative conversations that are professional, but we all act as critical friends to one another and really hold each other to account. And I think that's a duty in our sector that we have to our sector. If we want to retain the best and get the best in and track the best, we've got a duty to skin in the game. We've got a duty to keep our sector healthy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, so before we finish, let's hear the critical fourth area.
So then I would say the final one is that kind of stress, well-being management. Sometimes those softer skills of how we can train people on how to prioritize, delegate, say no, all of those sort of softer skills. And I think that is teachable. So I've worked with lots of leaders where I've coached them to understand prioritization and all of those aspects of being highly productive. And there are so many strategies out there. But I think also it's about making sure that we understand that well-being is tricky. To get all staff to find one thing that they agree on is almost impossible. So that's what makes this quite tricky, because for some staff, doing a yoga class on a Thursday after work might be the best news ever. For some, it might be the worst thing ever, because they just want to go home to their children, or they just want to go to that gym class that they never get to go to, or go home and make a meal that's not processed. So I think well-being to different people means different things. As a mother, I've got 2 girls, and it didn't matter to me not going to their sports day. It wasn't important that I attended their nativities and assemblies, unless they were doing something pretty lead role in them. It didn't matter. For me, it mattered that I was present in the holidays growing up and sharing those moments. And I made peace with the bits that I was okay to not be part of. But for some people, that's really important. So if a member of staff comes to you with a request, try to find a way to not say no. Create a culture where you've got that human aspect. And actually, I'm going to try and find a way to make this work. Because I've always had the philosophy that I've never gone to a boss unless I actually just want them to say yes to me. I wouldn't go to them. I wouldn't have that. Now, that is tricky because some people can abuse that. But I think it's about making sure that you really try and find a way to say yes to the magic, the things that they need. They've got an issue. They might be going through some sort of personal thing. And it's connecting to that human side of people and working out what ticks for different people. Because if you only focus on the well-being thing, so you've got that knitting club that happens on a Thursday, or you've got the night out, and if they still have to come back to dealing with those dysregulated children without the right support structures, if they're still feeling alone, that they can't approach leaders, if they're still feeling like they've got 90 books to mark from history and science and English, the well-being stuff on its own can actually make all of that far more stressful. So it can actually start having the detrimental impact. And I think it's all together looking at that and getting perspective and having well-established strategies in place that you can make those things happen, that mean that actually we're less open to risk, because actually schools are fragile institutions. Very quickly, one leader that doesn't then do all of those things can change the culture. One very tricky, somebody who is not necessarily a positive person that you employ can change culture. So culture can change very quickly. And it's keeping an eye on it all of the time.
Wow. I'm so grateful for you for sort of balancing out all of the different elements that we've covered today. I think in my first book, I talk about staff feeling unseen, unheard, and lacking a sense of value. But actually what you're talking about is a culture where every member of staff is seen and heard because the leaders are visible and they're asking, what do you need? And actually, there is an element we have to build resilience in ourselves. Of course there is. And we're there because it's a vocation. But at the same time, we know that we get the best out of people when they do feel valued. And when there is that culture of trust, of safety, of autonomy, for a member of staff to be able to say to a leader, I need help, is not actually as common as it sounds like it should be. Certainly not in the places I've worked and not with the staff that I'm speaking to now. So if people want to hear more about, how you do this and what you do, Sahreen, where would they find you?
I'd be more than happy to connect on LinkedIn. So Sahreen Siddiqui is my LinkedIn. I don't know if you can share that somehow, Rowena,
yes.
But more than happy for people to send me a message on LinkedIn and collaborate or have a conversation or just connect.
Lovely. I will put that link in the podcast notes. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it because I know you're a busy woman.
Thank you so much for reaching out. I've really enjoyed being part of your podcast and look forward to following you on Spotify and listening to other sessions.
Great. Thank you. And thanks everyone for listening. Thanks for listening. I hope you took something of value from today. If you want to connect, I'm at rowenahicks.com, or I have a Facebook group, which is Preventing Teacher Burnout. So I look forward to connecting to you at one of those.